for more protests. We did see that in the streets yesterday when there were National Guard troops standing outside of that federal building. That was where the protesters went. They wanted to be up in people's faces, and that seemed to be a symbol of the Trump administration's actions in Los Angeles, not just in terms of deploying federal troops here, but also those immigration raids that have been taking place across this region for several days now. So they seem to be a magnet for those sorts of protests, and I think that's one reason why we continue to hear Mayor Bass and Governor Newsom saying, we don't want these troops here. In addition to that, Steve, we also know that there's a legal battle playing out. The Attorney General of California, Rob Bonta, filed that lawsuit saying that he thinks that deploying National Guard troops to Los Angeles without the express consent or wishes of the governor is something illegal and that it exceeds his authority.
Carl, just stay right there. We are going to try and see if we can get that feed up of Governor Gavin Newsom now.
Accountable for corruption and fraud. He's declared a war on culture, on history, on science, on knowledge itself. Databases, quite literally, are vanishing.
He's delegitimizing news organizations, and he's assaulting the First Amendment. And the threat of defunding them, at threat, he's dictating what universities themselves can teach. He's targeting law firms and the judicial branch that are the foundations of an orderly and civil society. He's calling for a sitting governor to be arrested for no other reason than to, in his own words, for getting elected. And we all know this Saturday, he's ordering our American heroes, the United States military, and forcing them to put on a vulgar display to celebrate his birthday, just as other failed dictators have done in the past. Look, this isn't just about protests. When Donald Trump sought blanket authority to commandeer the National Guard, he made that order apply to every state in this nation. This is about all of us. This is about all of us. California may be first. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other democracy are next. Democracy. Democracy is under our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived. We have feared has taking a wrecking ball. He's taking a ball to our founding fathers' historic co-equal branches.
Yeah, we do apologize. As you can hear and see, we've been having some troubles with our connections there to bring you that news conference from Gavin Newsom. He was launching a blistering attack on President Donald Trump, saying that President Trump is breaking all sorts of norms and destabilizing America's institutions. Well, for more, let's cross over to Peter Bowes. He's also in Los Angeles for us. Peter, the governor there really not holding back with his attack on pushback on President Trump and what President Trump has been doing with these protests in L.A.
Yeah, this is the level of attack that we've been hearing from Gavin Newsom for the past few days, and essentially just from the little bit that we heard there, saying that democracy is under attack because of the president's actions. And of course, earlier in the day, the main focus of attention was the lawsuit that the governor has brought against the president, attempting to get an emergency motion through the courts to stop the deployment of the Marines and the National Guard into Los Angeles. Now, a judge has refused to acknowledge that, at least initially, so that motion has not been accepted by the court. But the judge saying that on Thursday there will be a hearing in court to discuss it in more detail. So it's really just on hold. The whole issue is just on hold for the moment. But it does leave the possibility that the courts could step in to force the federal government to remove those military forces that have been moved into Los Angeles. Of course, on the contrary, it could lend weight to the central government's argument, and those forces may indeed stay here. So we just need to wait and see what the court says. But the main news, and you've been talking about it with Carl, the curfew, which is coming in about an hour and a quarter now. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of the news conference, and you touched on it just now with Carl, was the putting it into perspective, talking about just 1 square mile in the center of Los Angeles, in a city that spreads 502 miles. That's the acreage of the city of Los Angeles. This is not LA County, this is just the city of Los Angeles. So we're looking at 0.2% of the city that will be affected by this curfew. And the mayor saying that these protests have really been focused on just a few streets in that area, just a few streets, but a tremendous amount of damage still to be assessed, but into the millions of dollars of damage that's been done through the vandalism that we've seen mostly late at night. And that's what they want to try to stop.
Yeah, that's right, Peter. That question was asked about how much damage all these protests that have gone on into the night have caused in LA. Nella McCosker, she's the chief executive of the Central City Association of Los Angeles. She was speaking in that media conference with Mayor Bass, and she said that the damage would go into the millions, but it was just too soon to know what that total cost is going to be. Just want to get your thoughts then of just coming back to Gavin Newsom and the California governor. He's been at odds with President Trump for quite a while, and it really is coming to the fore with these incidents in LA, with these reactions to these ICE raids.
Yeah, the level of anger is like something I haven't really seen before between these two politicians. It's right, they've been at loggerheads over many issues, most notably the way in which Los Angeles City dealt with the fires earlier this year, with the president strongly criticising not only Gavin Newsom but other city officials like the mayor in terms of the resources that were available to fight those fires and how everything panned out there. But now, as you say, the issue is the immigration raids that started on Friday and have been continuing over the last few days. It's not clear, and we heard this at the news conference as well, whether any of those raids have taken place today, and we don't know in large part, at least according to the mayor, because she said they are not informed when these raids take place. But the federal government, the Trump administration, has made it very clear that those raids will continue indefinitely, no matter what else is happening in Los Angeles, no matter what the protesters are saying. And that is the issue at the heart of the dispute that we're seeing at the moment. And there's really no surprise, because President Trump, candidate Trump, signalled this while he was campaigning last year, and he is just now seeing through what he promised. And it was an issue that I think in large part won him the election, a very closely fought election, but a victory all the same, a significant victory for him. And I think what is perhaps surprising is that it's taken so long for this to come to a head in a city like Los Angeles, which has a huge immigrant population and is filled with emotions in terms of the value of the immigrant community here, in terms of just everyday life. The families, the multi-generational families here who are immigrants and have maybe come from Mexico a couple of generations ago, have had children in this country, still have relatives that are in Mexico. It's a complex web of relations, but it's also crucially important to the California economy, and that there will be implications if there is a mass exodus of immigrants from Los Angeles.
Yeah, and it affects so many communities there as well, Peter. I'm just going to give some updates then from this news conference that Governor Gavin Newsom has been giving. We've got some lines coming out from that. Here's a quote from him. He says, "This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk." When it comes to talking about the National Guard, he says these are the men and women trained for foreign combat, not domestic law enforcement. Newsom says, referring to the National Guard deployment, which now numbers 4,000, instructed by President Donald Trump. He says, "We honor their service, we honor their bravery," adding that we don't want our streets militarized by our own armed forces, not in LA, not in California. The deployment of the National Guard, Peter, to get your thoughts on. This is an unusual move by the president, given that it was not something that was requested by the state or by the city.
Exactly, the first time in 60 years that the National Guard have been brought in against the wishes of a state governor. And we often see that the National Guard used across the country, usually in times of natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, fires. Oftentimes it's the National Guard alongside the other emergency services who are brought out to help. With the Marines, of course, it's a very different scenario. The Marines are trained for combat overseas, and overseas is usually where they are deployed, usually in conflicts and wartime situations overseas that the United States has an interest in. And significantly, the Marines are not allowed to arrest people. They won't be acting as police on the ground here. They will be, it seems, used in a role where they're protecting, working alongside the National Guard, protecting buildings, federal buildings, and protecting federal personnel. And of course, that includes those immigration personnel who've been very active, especially since last Friday, really at the centre of this issue that we've been talking about. But it's still relatively early days in terms of their deployment here. We understand it could last up to 60 days, and it really remains to be seen how prominent they will be on the streets, or whether they will be to some extent hidden away, perhaps closer to those buildings that they're supposed to be protecting, in terms of their relationship with the Los Angeles public, how close they'll get to the Marines, for example, and what sort of effect that will have, how intimidating potentially it could be for some people in the city just trying to go about their normal business.
Yeah, Mayor Bass, Karen Bass, the LA mayor, she was giving a press conference as well a short time ago before Gavin Newsom spoke. She was asked whether or not she had reached out to President Trump. It seems there has been a bit of a communication breakdown between the state and the Trump administration. She says she actually started to reach out today, and that she would keep people posted. And the fact that it's only, we're into day 5, and only now there seems to be a sort of an attempt to reach out to the Trump administration directly does really point to sort of the tension between the state and the city and the federal authorities.
Yeah, early on we know that the governor, Gavin Newsom, had quite a long phone conversation with the president. We really don't know the details of that call, but it really hasn't changed in terms of the level of animosity that we've been hearing in public from both of these men. And clearly Mayor Bass has made it very clear what she feels about the president's actions as well. So really no love lost between any of these individuals, which is a shame, really, because this city is, at least parts of this city are facing a crisis. There is clearly a knock-on effect to other communities, maybe not directly affected, but everyone is crucially aware of what is happening in Los Angeles. It's affecting the image of this city around the world. People looking at television pictures, looking online, looking at newspapers, and getting a certain image, maybe sometimes an inaccurate image of what's happening here. And so I think it is thought of here as sad that the key politicians are not getting on during this time.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for giving us that context from Los Angeles, Peter Bowes. Now, while the focus so far has been in LA, protests have also been taking place in other cities across the United States, including New York. Our Chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, has been speaking to Gabriela Silva, one of the organizers of the protests there.
It's extremely important that we've come out today in full force in solidarity with the people of Los Angeles that are facing severe repression from the National Guard, from heavily militarized federal cops, trying to squash their righteous protests in defense of immigrant rights and really in defense of all workers. And so we have been organizing here in New York City, fighting for the same things, for full rights for immigrants, for all workers to be able to live with dignity, and for an end to the attacks on our rights by the Trump administration.
Do you think the violence or the bits of violence we've seen in LA undermine the case, though?
The people of LA are the ones being subjected to the violence of the state right now. The National Guard is the one shooting tear gas, flashbangs into communities of immigrant families, of workers. That's the violence that we need to be speaking about today. We need to talk about the violence of the Trump administration that's getting ready to slash lifelines for working class people across this country, that are terrorizing and separating families and holding people in inhumane detention centers.
Okay, I think it's the LAPD that's firing the gas, but I take your point. But,
yes, LAPD.
But I suppose the question is, there's a legitimate concern here among immigrant communities, but when people see them throwing rocks, or people throwing rocks at the police, you know, Americans, a lot of Americans don't like it.
Well, what we see is that the mainstream media is trying to demonize the protesters at every turn. We've seen the Trump administration come out and say that they're rioters, that this is an invasion. The only invasion that we're seeing in our cities is ICE agents coming in and terrorizing our people and separating our people. We're seeing the military being sicked on people exercising their First Amendment right to protest. And so we cannot be distracted by the attempts of the mainstream media, of the billionaires in power like Trump that are trying to separate workers and make them feel like these protests are not calling for a righteous cause, which is full rights for immigrants and an end to this ICE terror that we're seeing across the country.
That was from New York. Just to remind you, LA Mayor Karen Bass has announced a partial curfew for Los Angeles to tackle the protests against immigration raids. You can see those protests still ongoing. And in a primetime address, California Governor Gavin Newsom has attacked Donald Trump for inflaming the LA situation further. We're going to be keeping a close watch on this story as it continues to develop. I'll be back in a few moments at the top of the hour with more. Do keep it right here on BBC News.
If you're an executive, this shirt is a must-have in your closet.
I was tired of floppy collars and shirts with sweat stains, so I got this shirt I saw on TV, and now I don't have to worry about any of that. I got it shipped in no time, and I switched from regular polos to this immediately. The brand is called Collars.
My melasma
Live from Singapore, this is BBC News. A curfew is announced for parts of downtown Los Angeles as protests over immigration raids continue for a fifth day. The governor of California launches a blistering attack on President Trump for deploying troops to the city.
This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk.
5 countries, including the UK and Australia, sanctioned 2 far-right Israeli ministers for inciting violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. And coming up in Business Today, the US and China have agreed to a framework on trade after 2 days of high-level talks. We'll be live in Beijing with the latest. Welcome to Newsday. In the last hour, California Governor Gavin Newsom has said he doesn't want the streets of his state militarized by the country's armed forces. It comes as the federal government has sent National Guard and Marines to quell immigration protests happening for 5 days in Los Angeles. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed that those troops will be providing protection for immigration agents during raids. Now, here is part of what Governor Newsom had to say in this last hour.
Like many states, California is no stranger to this sort of unrest. We manage it regularly and with our own law enforcement. But this, again, was different. What then ensued was the use of tear gas, flashbang grenades, rubber bullets, federal agents detaining people and undermining their due process rights. Donald Trump, without consulting California law enforcement leaders, commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets, illegally and for no reason. This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. That's when the downward spiral began. He doubled down on his dangerous National Guard deployment by fanning the flames even harder. And the president, he did it on purpose.
Now, the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, has set a curfew for the downtown part of the city as protests against U.S. immigration authorities continue for a 5th day. It's due to take effect in just under an hour. People will not be allowed outside until 6 a.m. on Wednesday local time. These protests are spreading to other major U.S. cities as well, including Chicago and New York, where people are marching against immigration raids. Well, for more on this story, we can connect with our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes. Peter, we heard Gavin Newsom there with some very strong words for President Trump. He even accused him of abuse of power.
Essentially, what he's accusing the president of is deliberate action to cause chaos in Los Angeles. Action through sending those troops in, the National Guard, now huge numbers, and several hundred Marines. And it's the sending in of the Marines over the last few hours that has so annoyed many people here, clearly including the governor, who is arguing in a lawsuit that the president's actions are illegal. Now, that lawsuit essentially pending now a court hearing on Thursday, when a judge will hear more detailed arguments from both sides, from the Trump administration and from the mayor of California. And only then will we really get an idea as to what the court thinks of this. And really there are 2 possibilities. If a judge makes a quick decision, either those forces will have to retreat from Los Angeles, or they will be given the weight of the court to stay here. So a lot is pending there, and a lot of weight on the decision of that judge. So we need to wait and see what happens there. But in the meantime, as you've just been reflecting, we're hearing a tremendous amount of rhetoric still from certainly from Donald Trump, but also from Gavin Newsom, and the level of debate really in terms of the acrimony between these two. I think I've never seen it as bad. They've argued before. They argued about policy during the Los Angeles fires a few months ago. And now we have the president saying that the governor and other officials in Los Angeles are not capable of keeping the peace, which is why he said he took the action that he did. In fact, the president was speaking at a military rally in South Carolina earlier on today, and he again explained his actions sending these troops to Los Angeles.
As long as we have the military there, the protests won't mean anything. Last night, if we weren't there, they would have burned down the city. But they did not a lot of damage other than they broke up a lot of concrete looking for weapons. You know, those are weapons. If that hits somebody in the head, the person's dead. You know that, right?
What do you mean by a very heavy force will be met with the protest?
Oh, the military will be very heavy force. I'm very proud to tell you that. They might as well turn around. They're wasting their time. Some of them will end up in jail for a long period of time.
Yeah, while the war of words continues between the governor and the president, Peter, the LA mayor, Karen Bass, she's confirmed that a curfew will be put in place tonight. And in part, that's to affect things that have been happening on the ground. It seems like they're stepping up what they can do to try and bring peace and law and order to the streets of LA.
Yeah, and this is because she says there's been a growing number of arrests over the last few days, reaching a peak today with 130 arrests already, plus another 67 arrests for unlawful occupation of a freeway. We saw a huge crowd surge onto the 101 freeway in central Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, something that's happened over the last couple of days. And the police en masse arresting people and detaining them for those actions there. And they will face potentially the consequences. There'll be legal action against those individuals. And in addition to that, she talked in detail about the looting that we especially saw late last night and the vandalism that is there for all to see in parts of downtown Los Angeles. It's being caused by a relatively few number of people compared with those on the streets protesting the immigration issue. But nevertheless, people seemingly coming out after dark, determined to cause some damage, determined to clash with the police. And this largely happening in just a few streets, just a few areas of downtown Los Angeles. She explained it as 1 square mile in an area of a city that covers more than 500 square miles. And it's just that 1 square mile where the curfew will come into force in now just under 1 hour, just as it's getting dark in Los Angeles, and it'll last until 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, for people who live there, businesses, those people can go in, but for everyone else, they will be arrested if they step into that 1 square mile of the city.
Yeah, Peter, important to give that context of the scale of the unrest that we have been seeing. Thanks very much for that, our North America correspondent, Peter Bowes. Now, William Enyart, a former Democratic congressman and a retired general who led the Illinois National Guard from 2007 to 2012, gave me his thoughts on the protests.
That these are really quite localized demonstrations and quite small in comparison to past upheavals that we've seen, whether in Los Angeles or other large cities.
And just on the characterization of the protests, I mean, you've described them there as quite small and being sort of localized within the city. That's not how it's been described as by President Trump. He's called it an assault on peace and public order. And we heard just now as well from that Republican senator saying that, you know, it has become quite lawless.
Well, in point of fact, what is happening is that the president is turning this into political theater. He needs political theater. He thrives on political theater, and he's been previously labeled as the king of reality television. And what better gripping reality television is a couple of burning cars in a street. That certainly plays into the president's hyperbole, where everything is a disaster, everything is the fault of the Democrats, and his usual characterizations. Trump has some very, very real problems with the tariffs and what the tariffs are doing to the economy, and what his tax bill in the Congress is preparing to do to the American people. He knows he's losing desperately on those issues. So he needs to, what those folks in Washington, D.C. describe as a pivot. He needs to pivot. He needs to distract the American people from the reality of his administration, the failures of his administration, and selectively portray this as some kind of a disaster, when in point of fact, it's really fairly well contained. The mayor said her folks had it under control. The governor said they had it under control. What Trump has done is he has entirely disregarded the playbook of how the National Guard responds to civil disorder. We've had decades of experience in the National Guard responding to civil disorder. There's a very well laid out plan on how we proceed. The local chief executive is in charge of that municipality. She's elected by the people there. It's her home. She knows what her resources are in that municipality. If her resources are overwhelmed, the next step is to go to the governor. The governor has the authority to bring in the National Guard on his own, or he can send in state police, or he can send in other local law enforcement to assist. And the reason for that procedure is because the local people know the needs and the resources. Donald Trump jumping in from 3,000 miles away, he has no idea of what's really going on the ground, but what he does want to do is make political theater, and he's succeeding brilliantly at making political theater.
Well, if he is making political theater, as you say, then it could come at quite a cost, couldn't it? We're seeing more demonstrations grow into other cities. Is there a risk that this could almost be self-fulfilling and that there could be more trouble ahead?
Well, I will tell you that I'm very concerned about that. I think Donald Trump is itching to declare the Insurrection Act. He is itching to take all power essentially unto himself. You know, James Madison said prior to the American Revolution that when you concentrate all power, that is the legislative, the judicial, and the executive, in one hand, one set of hands, then you have a dictatorship. What Donald Trump has been doing with his executive orders, which is legislation effectively, with his complete disregard of the judicial process and disregarding a due process, taking people, throwing them on airplanes and deporting them to foreign prisons, is asserting control of the judiciary. And then, of course, he already has the executive branch, which he has been in the process of decimating through with his consortium with Elon Musk.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
What is going on?
People love how the new Homes.com helps them get quick answers about any property by connecting them to the actual listing agent.
Oh, so I'm done?
Oh, no. We're still not sure everyone knows that we're the only site that always connects you to the listing agent rather than selling off your contact info. So we're going to keep you up there a little while longer.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting great exposure.
Speaking of exposure, can we get him a hat?
Ooh, what about a beret?
Oh. Ding dong.
Homes.com. We've done your homework.
At Avocado Green Mattress, we know that we all deserve a little rest. That's why we're promoting better sleep this season with our certified organic mattresses and bedding, all made with natural, luxurious materials for a healthier planet and a healthier you. Start your sleep trial today at avocadogreenmattress.com.
Police in Northern Ireland have used water cannon after bricks and fireworks were thrown at them during a second evening of disorder in Ballymena in County Antrim. Last night, 15 officers were injured in similar violence. The trouble broke out following a protest about an alleged sexual assault. Detectives say they are investigating a number of attacks on the homes and businesses of foreign nationals as racially motivated hate crimes. Vincent McAviney has more.
A second night of disorder. Petrol bombs, fireworks and masonry thrown at police. In response, baton rounds fired, riot dogs on the scene and water cannon deployed. The scenes on Monday and Tuesday night followed a court hearing. 2 teenage boys who spoke through a Romanian interpreter charged with the attempted rape of a teenage girl. Their solicitors said they would be denying the charges. Police say they believe some people were intent on violence.
This violence was clearly racially motivated and targeted at our minority ethnic community and the police. It was racist thuggery, pure and simply, and any attempt to justify or explain it as something else is misplaced. I want to condemn these attacks in the strongest possible terms. It has no place in our society and should be loudly condemned by all right-thinking people.
Police have called for calm and say a significant presence will remain in Ballymena in the coming days. Vincent McAviney, BBC News.
2 far-right Israeli government ministers have been sanctioned by the UK, Norway, Australia, Canada and New Zealand because of what the British government describes as repeated incitements of violence against Palestinian communities. Israel's Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich will both face a travel ban from the UK and see their UK assets frozen. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has the story.
2 ministers on whom Israel's coalition government depends, both hardliners, both on the nationalist far right, both now officially sanctioned by Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and Norway. They accuse the 2 men of repeatedly inciting acts of aggression and violence against civilians in the occupied West Bank, encouraging the growth of illegal settlements, abusing the human rights of Palestinians. And for that, they're now subject to travel and asset bans.
Today we are announcing sanctions against those individuals because we have been absolutely clear. This has to stop, and we stand for a 2-state solution. And the settler violence that we've seen in the West Bank particularly is entirely unacceptable and must stop.
Mr. Speaker, 2024 saw the worst settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank.
In part, the government's responding to political pressure. Echoed in Parliament this evening, MPs urging ministers to go further and formally recognise a state of Palestine. In Israel, there was fury.
It is outrageous that elected representatives and members of the government are subjected to this kind of measures. We will hold a special government meeting early next week to decide on our response to this unacceptable decision.
Today in Gaza, there were yet more funerals after yet more airstrikes near Khan Yunis. There were also reports of more Palestinians shot dead near a US-backed aid distribution centre. For its part, the US stood by Israel, saying the sanctions were extremely unhelpful.
It's a huge shock, and I have a feeling the United States will respond appropriately. And I'm hoping that it will be a strong condemnation of this action on the part of these nations that really we would like to think are our allies.
Those allies hope their sanctions may change Israel's behaviour in the West Bank, where today in Nablus there was another army raid. But without US support, they may be waiting some time. James Landale, BBC News.
Hundreds of people have gathered for a vigil in Austria after a gunman killed 10 people in a shooting at a high school in what's the deadliest gun attack in the country's recent history. The vigil marks the start of 3 days of national mourning in Austria. It's thought the suspect was a 21-year-old former pupil at the school who used 2 weapons, both of which were legally owned. Northern India is in the grip of an intense heat wave, with the temperature soaring past 45 degrees Celsius. It's having an impact on normal life and sparking health concerns. BBC's Arunade Mukherjee is on the ground in Delhi, and he joins us now. Arunade, living in the city, take us through quite how bad it is.
Well, Steve, it's been fairly intense over the past couple of days, and the worry is that it is likely to get even more intense over the next few more days before there are some predictions of light rains closer to the weekend. So the several residents of northern India are certainly waiting for that. I'm currently in a central part of Delhi, and this is a marketplace where the traffic has just started moving. The shops are yet to open, but this is a very busy area at any given day. But it's still early hours, just going to be about 8 o'clock in about 10 minutes. So shops are yet to open, but this is usually very, very crowded. And just to give you a sense of what the situation is, you know, stepping out of an air-conditioned room is just, you really feel the difference. There are these hot waves of, you know, air which sweep across your body. It's very hard for you to spend more than a few minutes outside. You're drenched in sweat. It's very hard to breathe beyond the point because you feel like you're breathing in hot air like steam. It's hard to keep your eyes open, especially in the scorching sun. It's been like this over the last few days. What the worry really is, with the increased construction over the last couple of years, the green cover has certainly suffered in the capital city of Delhi, where I am, which means that because of the heavy concretization, a lot of the heat gets seeped into the concrete, and the nights are also equally warm because at that time the heat is emanating from the concrete structures which have come up over the last couple of days. As far as some measures that the government has taken to try and tackle the situation, well, you've got a lot of water coolers which have been set up in some central points to help the public cope. You have, you know, other aspects like big trucks going across the city trying to spray various areas with water to try and cool it down. But the real worry is a lot of the vulnerable sections of society which continue to live in, you know, poorly ventilated homes, in makeshift homes, who are really facing the brunt of this heat. And that is the real worry every year, year after year.
Yeah, Runade, the implications seem incredibly serious for personal health. Also has implications for the economy. You mentioned that shops are just about to open. It'll be challenging for them to operate.
Absolutely. So one, of course, is the health implication. You know, last year, if you go by some figures and reports, just a month's heat wave last year claimed about 100 lives. Over 40,000 people were admitted in hospitals due to heat strokes and heat-related illnesses. So that is one side, which, of course, the government is prepping for. But they are hopeful that in the next few days, if the temperatures do dip, then it will provide some respite. But the other big worry is you have to understand, you know, over 50% of India's population is engaged in some form of agricultural activity, which means working outdoors. You also have, you know, over 80% of the Indian economy in the informal sector. So a lot of those are very, very prone to these kind of situations. In the last few years, you've seen a lot of quick e-commerce websites and online portals that have come in, which are promising these 10-minute, 15-minute deliveries. They are the most vulnerable as we speak in these kind of intense heat waves.
Arunday, thanks very much for getting us up to speed with that. Arunday Mukherjee in Delhi. Now let's turn our focus to business and market news in Business Today. Top officials from the United States and China say they've agreed to a framework to move forward on trade after 2 days of intense high-level negotiations in London. While details were limited, this does mark a step forward in resolving the ongoing tensions between the world's top two economies. We can get more details from our China correspondent, Stephen McDonald. He's in Beijing. Stephen, looks like we have a framework. What more can you tell us?
Well, let's start with what this is not. It's not a broad agreement which is going to bring about an end to the US-China trade war. What it is a means for Beijing and Washington to somehow get back on track to move forward, to keep going with these trade negotiations. Now, it's described as a framework. I mean, who knows what that means? And also, we don't even know what's in the framework. Well, I mean, what areas does it cover, apart from how widespread it sort of is to be? However, it does seem to include a loosening up of the restrictions on Chinese companies from selling rare earths to the US. Now, rare earths are crucial in the manufacture of automobiles and all sorts of things. And in the other direction, it does seem to involve an easing of US restrictions on supplying microchip technology to China. Now, the reason we think that is because, apart from the fact that officials have been hinting at this when they've come out of the meeting, this has been their sort of key sticking point in recent weeks. It's where the mud has been slinging between Beijing and Washington, covering these areas. And so it sort of makes sense to try and fix that stuff up first as a sort of goodwill gesture so they can kind of move on with these talks into the future.
Yeah, Stephen, just give us a bit more context then about this relationship between the US and China then, because these are sort of trade talks, but it sort of bleeds into sort of the geopolitical competition between the two countries as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people will remember that we're in the midst of a sort of 90-day truce in the trade war. Now, this came following, if we take this right back to when Donald Trump unleashed his sort of tariff chaos on the world. All these other countries are sort of not knowing what to do. Well, China just stood up to the US on this and stuck their own tariffs on US goods. Both the superpowers are sort of going at it until it got to over 100% of tariffs. And so now, you know, this, well, we're now down to, I think it's just 10 and 15% respectively. But the goal is to, of course, get rid of all of those. But you're right, it's not just about trade, it's geopolitical and it's about face. And so a lot has to be done to sort this out.
So many different angles to this story, Stephen. Yeah, and we'll have to be watching closely to see if we get a clearer picture in the days ahead following this meeting. Stephen McDonald there in Beijing. And we've come to the end of Newsday for this hour. I'll be back at the top hour with more news for you. Do keep it here on BBC News. See you soon.
Now on BBC News, a global, topical, weekly show that lifts the hood on the entertainment and news business, exploring the companies and personalities who command our attention and how our perception of the world is shaped by them. The Media Show.
Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. This week on The Media Show, we'll look at NPR, National Public Radio in the US, and its efforts to resist cuts to its federal funding. We'll learn about the Hajj in Saudi Arabia as a media event, and we'll look at Apple's long history of investing in China. That's all coming up on The Media Show. National Public Radio, NPR, is one of the most recognised names in US media, but President Trump is hostile. He's accused it of having a liberal bias, and he's instigated moves to see its federal funding cut. Well, I've been speaking to NPR's CEO, Catherine Ma, who joined us on The Media Show to discuss the hostility coming from the White House.
Well, my message is really about the importance of public broadcasting and our mandate to serve a wide audience. I think that you'll probably align with this in terms of being a public broadcaster yourself. But one of the things that we see with smaller commercial broadcasters or larger commercial broadcasters is they do tend to specify their audiences around demographics, political beliefs, especially in the United States. As a public broadcaster, we have a mission and mandate as a recipient of taxpayer dollars to serve all points of view and to be able to present the fairest stories possible. So that's what I'm here to speak about. I recognize that my peers in the commercial space also endeavor to do this, but we do have a sort of special aspect with regards to our specific mission.
And I hear your ambition of covering all perspectives and of making sure your content reaches all Americans, but there is a perception you'll be aware of that NPR is much more likely to reach affluent Americans and liberal Americans than it may be to reach people who don't describe themselves in those terms. Is that unfair?
I do think that perception is unfair, although I recognize that there's also work that we need to do. So looking at the people who come to our website, who listen to our podcasts, and we have the best data because those are the digital platforms that offer us the most insight into our audiences. They really reflect the distribution of the American public from all 50 states. They also reflect the distribution of the American public in terms of their political beliefs. The country is roughly broken up, a third people who lean left, a third people who lean right, and a third people who identify as centrist. And that is the demographic of people who listen to us. So we recognize the perception, and I do believe we have a lot more to do to reach people who are perhaps not as affluent, people who don't live in major cities, and people who perhaps have not finished a college education. But nonetheless, we do have a pretty wide diversity of listeners who come to us for music, news, all of the things that we offer in terms of programming. It would be reductive just to focus on the political aspect of what it is that we report on.
And of course, you know better than anyone that not everyone within the Trump administration, including the president himself, agrees with what you've just said. The president believes that NPR has a liberal bias. He's called for its federal funding and the federal funding of PBS to be withdrawn. And the order connecting to that says neither entity presents a fair, accurate or unbiased portrayal of current events to tax-paying citizens. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is the body that distributes this federal money, he says, shall cancel existing direct funding to the maximum extent allowed by law and shall decline to provide future funding. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Well, of course, we were anticipating that the president might take such an action. We were nonetheless disappointed. We feel as though that is counter to the spirit of the Public Broadcasting Act, which is the legislation under which we were created. That act back more than 50 years ago was intended to create a separation between government and public broadcasting in order to be able to maintain our independence. And the president's statements around his perspectives on our editorial production really violate the principles of a free press and free First Amendment rights in the United States. So we have recently entered into litigation around this on the premise that this is a violation of the First Amendment, free association rights, viewpoint discrimination, and a number of other characteristics.
But while you're doing that, the president has now this week moved to formalise this cut, says it could become law within 45 days. So will your legal challenge be considered within that time frame?
Well, that's a good question. We are moving quickly. We have requested that we seek the expedited relief, which is what many organizations who have recently filed suit or enjoined against the administration have also sought to do. It is, of course, up to Congress whether they take up this vote, and we do anticipate that they will in the next 45 days. However, I come back to this point that I made around viewpoint discrimination. We have a robust set of precedent in our judiciary in the United States that says that the government is not in the business of determining what is biased or unbiasing the press. And so we do feel as though, from that standpoint, this is really about defending those First Amendment principles from which all of those conversations around funding flow.
Now, you are a relatively new arrival at NPR. Clearly, one of the things on your list of things to do would have been to manage NPR's funding. That's a responsibility of every CEO of the organization. I just wonder what else was on your list coming in. You must have had a list. What was on it?
Oh my goodness, so much that I was looking forward to doing and still am looking forward to doing. So of course, we're asking ourselves the question of where does generative AI and AI in general fit into the future of news broadcasting? As a broadcaster that grew out of radio, what are we doing in terms of video and our accessibility to younger audiences who are not turning on the radio in the same way that they used to? I was really excited about our opportunity to reach out to those younger audiences and think about how we might create programming that really appeals there. So there are just a number of different things that we're looking forward to doing that perhaps we haven't had the time to do. You know, the backbone in the United States is really this local promise. It's this idea that national programming supports local programming, and local programming is part of why people appreciate national programming. To do that sort of strategic integration would take more time than we've had when we've been so focused on this conversation around federal funding.
All right, so you had a lot of things on your list there. Some of them, for example, how newsrooms use AI is one that we turn to a lot on the media show. Another thing we talk about a lot on the program is the culture of journalism within big organizations. And last week on the program, we heard from Joe Kahn, the editor of the New York Times, and he told us the craft of journalism is something you can't take for granted when you're hiring people, because increasingly we have to do that training and the building of the values that we consider central to our journalistic mission ourselves, rather than assuming that they got that somewhere else. And I wonder what your ambitions were for the journalistic culture of NPR, and frankly, whether it needed changing.
Well, I think that that is a fantastic question, and certainly one of the conversations that many publishers in the United States have been having. There is a tension and a perception among journalists, particularly younger generations, around what does neutrality or objectivity even look like in this day and age when many of us come from points of view and lived experiences that inform our reporting? And how do we account for that while also seeking to be fair and objective in all of the work that we do? I agree with Khan that the primary thing is really thinking about how do we train on our ethics and integrity as journalists, our processes, our standards and practices. And as NPR, that is a thing that we've been able to do, is to invest heavily in my tenure in that work. And so we've hired additional editors and standards and practice editors. That means the people who give guidance on how we approach stories, difficult conversations, difficult topics that may have ambiguity in the way that they're presented.
But do you think you were coming into a newsroom which was, and it wouldn't be the only newsroom to be accused of this, was being timid or nervous around certain subjects?
You know, I think that's a really interesting question. I wouldn't accuse us of being timid or nervous about coverage, for example, of the administration. I think that that is a thing we've heard a lot recently, is that American newsrooms have had some constraints, perhaps, on how they've approached that, perhaps given their corporate ownership. That has not been an experience for us. My view is that we cover all elected officials fairly and did so before the Trump administration for the Biden administration.
But what about cultural and social issues too? You'll of course be aware of the NPR journalist Yuri Berliner who quit and who accused NPR of having a lack of diversity of thought. Do you think there was any merit to his critique?
I think it is really important for us to have greater diversity in terms of perspectives and viewpoints at NPR and in journalism writ large. I've seen the statistic that fewer than 3% of journalists in the United States identify as conservative. I would recognize that most journalists don't identify politically at all. This is one of the reasons that my view is that that local network of stations and newsrooms is so critically important to public radio and to journalism as a whole, because we really see it as a feeder system for training up young journalists, ensuring that they have high adherence to the integrity we're looking for. But it really brings to us people from across the US who have very different perspectives than what you might anticipate coming out of DC or New York. And so that's of tremendous value to the American public.
And Catherine, when you took over the job, very quickly people highlighted some of the things that you had said about Donald Trump previously. One tweet referred to him as a fascist and a deranged racist sociopath. Do you regret that, or do you think that news organisations need to make their peace with the fact that if they hire people from outside of their organisations, they're going to have had opinions?
I regret that it's become a talking point when we're looking at the work that we do. My view is that my responsibility here, as it has been in every role, is to be able to fully serve our mission. And I measure the success of our work by how well we do that and the perspectives that are reflected both in our programming and in our audiences. And so that is the first and highest goal for me. I do think that it is complicated. We are moving into an era in which every single person who is coming into the workforce has some sort of digital background. I view this as a moment of adaptation in which we are all going to have to negotiate on a case-by-case basis as employers how we handle those backgrounds without them necessarily being disqualifying as we train people in their professional responsibilities.
This is from one of the live streams from Mecca in Saudi Arabia this week, where 2 million Muslims from all over the world have been gathering for the Hajj. It's one of the 5 core duties or pillars of Islam, which all able-bodied Muslims are expected to complete at least once in their lives. The Hajj is also a huge media event. The official Saudi press agency says around 5,000 journalists and tech staff and more than 150 media outlets are accredited. And to get a sense of what it's like to report on, I spoke to Shahab Khan, political correspondent with ITV News. 2 years ago, he took part in the Hajj and also reported on it.
My day job has me as a political correspondent for ITV News, which is obviously very different to being out on the Hajj. I'm usually trapped in Westminster chasing politicians down Whitehall. So this was a very new experience for me in terms of covering a more personal aspect of my life. What we did was we went out and I performed the Hajj. And while I did that, we did 2 things. We both contributed live reports and live hits to the ITV News for the bulletins at 6:30 and at 10 p.m. And then we also made a long-form documentary, which then went out at the end of my journey, which we then came back and did a very quick, fast turnaround edit. So 2 very different types of journalism and reporting while we were out there, and a very different experience to the one that I was used to of on-the-day reporting compared to this unique experience of 2 million or so people travelling in from all over the world to all go through a very personal experience.
And apart from making the case to your bosses that this was a story worth covering and a programme worth making, I assume you had to get a range of different permissions from the Saudi authorities to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. This happens every single year. So, as you'll know, when you are trying to have discussions with editors about stories that you think are relevant, we are always looking for a news angle, something that makes it new. So trying to pitch something which is actually an annual event is more difficult than you would think, because when the question comes back at you, well, what's new? This happens every single year. It's quite hard to find. But this was a very unique time because there had just been the pandemic. While the world was in lockdown, the Hajj had to continue because it has gone on continuously for hundreds of years. So during the pandemic, they had a very restricted period where there was only a few hundred or few thousand people. I don't know the exact figures off the top of my head. This time round when I went a couple of years ago, it was the first time they had gone back to full capacity since the pandemic. So that gave us this unique angle and a reason to actually go out there, and it made it very newsworthy and different to what we'd seen before. Also in that time, we had a couple of years of the pandemic obviously disrupting things, and the Saudis used that time to update a lot of technology and make things very different. So we went out there to have a look at what those new technologies would actually look like and how they worked. In terms of the practicalities of actually getting out there, there is, as there often is with any sort of big media event, a long accreditation process. We started it quite early on. it's rare for British journalists to actually go out there because of what I said, because there's not really a new angle every year. So we were dealing with the embassy and going through this process in a way that a lot of journalists in the UK haven't done before, but it was fairly swift. And once we got out there, the challenge was telling this huge story with 2 million people going through this in a way that no one had actually seen before, because we were filming on the ground as we were doing it.
And when you were filming on the ground, were there restrictions on who you could talk to and where you could go?
Yes and no. There were no restrictions because they were put on us by anyone, so we had free rein to do anything. However, there are physical logistical restrictions because there's 2 million people and it's quite hard to move around. And the Saudi security teams who are based there do a lot of crowd management. So we went and had a look at some of the technologies they use. They have cameras, they have drones. They also have experts in crowd management who use these cameras to determine which roads should be closed and when, to try and keep people safe, to stop there being overcrowding. That is actually, when you're filming a documentary or filming a news report, quite tough, because you'll be in position A, you will see position B 100 metres down the road where you want to get to film, but all the roads are shut and it's quite difficult.
Yeah,
so
I can imagine.
That is what was logistically quite challenging.
I was mentioning that, for example, this year we're expecting 5,000 journalists and tech staff to attend. Must they be Muslim to get permission to attend?
Yes, so to do the Hajj and to be in the area, you have to be a Muslim, which again for us was a bit of a challenge because I wasn't going out there on my own. We had a full team with us. We had camera crew, we had producers, we had translators. So then we had to find British Muslims or Muslims who had worked for us in different parts of the world to all come together, because to do the Hajj, you do have to be a Muslim. So that was a bit of a challenge. But again, ITV News, and the same with the BBC, of course, we have journalists all over the world and we have colleagues in fantastic places all over the world. So it wasn't too difficult for us to find people who were willing and able to do what is supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
And one final question. When you had completed your reporting, not the live reporting, but when you were collecting material, did anyone need to see it before you sent it back to London to be used?
No, not at all. So the Saudis were very good at just sort of giving us free rein. And letting us do whatever we wanted. No one checked the material afterwards. No one watched the footage. No one watched the reports. No one watched the documentary until they went out on air. We wouldn't have accepted anything otherwise. In the discussions we had before, they didn't even ask, because I think they would have been very aware of the fact that if that was even suggested, we would have said no. And because of that, we went out and gave the most honest and truthful report that we could possibly do. And we tried to highlight all the things that we saw. And I went through my own personal experiences. And if you do watch it, you get to watch me shave my head for the only time in my life, which was quite a brutal experience on camera. And we were honest about it. And you were honest about, I was honest about the fact that I was quite nervous about that. And I was honest about the fact that we'd bbeen waiting in a traffic jam for 3.5 hours and we hadn't moved because 2 million people were trying to move from point A to point B. So we were honest, and no one watched any of the footage until it went out on ITV.
Now, as I'm sure you're aware, President Trump has been talking about tariffs a lot in recent months. And one tariff he's floated the idea of is a 25% tariff on smartphone manufacturers, including Apple, if they don't manufacture more in the US. And to understand how Apple does manufacture its smartphones, we've been speaking to Patrick McGee, an FT journalist, an expert on Apple, and someone who has a book out about Apple's investment in China, because to understand how Apple makes smartphones, we've got to look at its connection with Chinese factories.
So I was already the Apple reporter for the Financial Times. So sort of Apple was chosen, let's say, right? That was already the company I was following. The thing that I began to question was what the Achilles heel of the company was. And it's actually because I had become really bullish on the company. You know, our generation is sort of 50-50 Android versus iOS. The next generation, at least in America, is actually about 90% iOS. And so I just began to think, I mean, generationally, as those college kids or high school kids graduate, they're going to be buying MacBooks, they're going to be buying AirPods, etc. And I wrote a number of stories on that front, but I needed to ask the other question too. I didn't want to just be drinking the Kool-Aid. I wanted to ask sort of the Achilles heel question. And everything leads to China if you start asking those questions. And I really thought we just hadn't covered it. The only real story we've covered about Apple in China over the last 20 years is the tedium of assembling an iPhone. And honestly, like, that's about it.
And when did this deep investment in China begin? Has it been going on throughout Apple's existence, or can we pinpoint a moment where it escalated?
No, so if you remember in the 80s, Apple made its own computers, even down to the circuit board. Steve Wozniak was someone that really designed the circuit board and made them, and Steve Jobs' pregnant sister Patty began putting them together while she was on the telephone to people, back in the late 1970s. So Apple then had factories in Ireland, Singapore, and California, and later Colorado. And they really built their own computers for a long time. But the problem was that everybody else in the PC industry really began to outsource and then began to offshore. And the result is that Apple was the last holdout. Everyone had either gone bankrupt or gone offshore. And by late 1996, Apple is days away from missing payroll. And so they have to abandon their own manufacturing and adopt outsourcing. Then I tell this sort of 7-year narrative where they're experimenting with contract manufacturers in 8 or 9 countries, places you didn't know that they were building iMacs, the Czech Republic, Wales, even Fullerton, California. Korea was the main place. And China basically wins that battle, let's say, after 7 years. The armies of affordable, abundant labor in China, they don't necessarily have the tech competence, but they respond to Apple's demands, and they'll work 12 hours a day, and it sure is cheap, and they'll build factories at massive scale, at a time scale where, you and I would still be doing the environmental paperwork.
And so this move by Apple to heavily invest in China was something that was actively pursued by the Chinese at huge scale, and they would have seen a big strategic benefit from it happening?
Yeah, I mean, the epigraph to my book is a made in 2015 document from China saying, without manufacturing, there is no country, there is no nation, right? I mean, China really has this like Nietzschean will to power, and it's based on manufacturing more than anything else. I don't know another country that thinks of manufacturing as the way to, be a part of the world, the way that China does. And so by 2003, Apple really begins to consolidate everything into China. There's no architect to that decision. I don't believe Tim Cook, the current CEO, even though he was the operations guy, was the architect. It was suppliers themselves, dozens, hundreds of suppliers, who are all choosing China because if you looked at, how to create a computer on 3 different continents, China was just winning out every time. And so it just sort of consolidated pretty rapidly.
For a while then, that was presumably working very well for Apple and working very well for the Chinese. To what degree, though, has Apple's degree of investment in China left it exposed to a president who comes in and changes the rules of global trade?
So I don't think it's really all that contestable that Apple is stuck in China. I mean, there really is no place on earth that offers the same combination of cost, quantity, and scale. The nuance to my book is that China didn't offer that scale to, or offer that tech competence to Apple. Apple built it there. And so the sort of missing topography in the study of Apple is a part of operations called manufacturing design, or MD. And these are people that would fly from California to literally hundreds of factories across China to handhold, teach, audit, supervise, and install millions of dollars worth of machinery into other people's factories, and later billions of dollars of machinery to teach them how to use it, to teach them all these skills. And what happens there is China becomes world leading in manufacturing as a result of these staggeringly large investments. I mean, we're talking $55 billion a year in investments in Chinese factories by 2015.
And as I'm listening to you, Patrick, I'm thinking how in very different ways, Apple is known as being a relatively secretive company. And of course, China is known as being a secretive country. So was it difficult to get people to talk?
Yeah, there's nothing relative about it. I mean, Apple is more secretive than the US military, according to people that have worked at both. Very difficult to get people to talk. I did speak with more than 200 people. I would say more than the quantity was actually the caliber of the people, and I think that comes through the text, some of them off record, some of them on record. But it is very difficult to get people to talk. I suppose what worked in my favor is I was telling a 30-year history. So the more that you could inform some source, let's say in 2005, that you already knew so many details that had never been written about 2003, 2004, they would then be willing to sort of tell you a little bit more to sort of help you in the narrative. And then I would just keep doing that until the present.
Well, your book is called Apple in China, The Capture of the World's Greatest Company. We appreciate you coming on to talk about it. There's one other tech story I do want to ask you about before we finish up on the media show today, and it concerns a legend of Apple, Sir Johnny Ive, who designed the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. He has just joined OpenAI, which has bought his startup, I.O., in a over $6 billion deal. Let's just hear a little of the clip of the announcement.
The products that we're using to deliver and connect us to unimaginable technology, they're decades old.
Yeah.
And so it's just common sense to at least think, surely there's something beyond these legacy products.
What was your reaction to that, Patrick? Just quickly, if you would.
I would love to be wrong about this, but I'm pretty pessimistic that there's going to be some screenless device coming out of this studio. And the reason I say it is that we're addicted to screens not because they're just compelling. I mean, they work so well for everything. And so are you going to augment the screen and have another cellular connection where there's an expensive device coupled with a monthly price? That seems difficult. Are you going to displace the iPhone altogether? That's a really tall order. So if they can blow my mind with something new, God knows we're all missing a Steve Jobs one more thing moment. And I would love to see that, but I just don't have the imagination for what this is going to do that you couldn't just do on your iPhone.
That was Patrick McGee talking about his book, Apple in China, The Capture of the World's Greatest Company. And Apple has responded. It says it disputes his investigation and says the book is filled with inaccuracies. That's it for this week. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. As ever, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Ukraine is just about holding the front here, while the Russians have launched this fresh assault.
Everywhere you look, there are uprooted trees, there are bits of building, and the destruction is just in every direction.
Incendiary drones were dropped here. We know this was the military junta because the rebels don't have that kind of weaponry.
While you can hear the tear gas canisters being lobbed at the protesters.
There, when the story breaks, BBC News.
For me, trust is about presence.
About fostering relationships all around the world, over years.
It's about patience, not rushing to be the first,
but striving to get it right.
To get to the truth.
We can't just ask the questions.
We have to question the answers. Debate, debate, debate. We have to create a space for opposing voices to be heard
and challenged.
We fight every day
to earn your trust.
And we never take it for granted.
We capture the story.
Fact check the story.
Break the story.
We explore the story.
So you can trust us to tell it.
Live from Singapore, this is BBC News. A partial curfew comes into effect in Los Angeles as protests against immigration raids continue for a fifth day.
I'm Carl Nassman, live in downtown Los Angeles. That's all as the governor of California launches a blistering attack against President Trump's decision to bring the troops into the city.
This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk.
5 countries, including the UK and Australia, sanctioned 2 far-right Israeli ministers for allegedly inciting violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. A second night of serious disorder breaks out in Northern Ireland, with petrol bombs and fireworks being thrown at police following a protest over an alleged sexual assault. We start Newsday in the United States, where a curfew has just come into effect in downtown LA, as protests over immigration raids continue for a 5th day. In the last hour, California Governor Gavin Newsom has said he doesn't want the streets of his state militarized by the country's armed forces. It comes as the federal government has sent National Guard and Marines to quell the protests. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed that those troops will be providing protection for immigration agents during raids. Now, here is part of Governor Newsom's had to say moments ago.
Like many states, California is no stranger to this sort of unrest. We manage it regularly and with our own law enforcement. But this, again, was different. What then ensued was the use of tear gas, flashbang grenades, rubber bullets, federal agents detaining people and undermining their due process rights. Donald Trump, without consulting California law enforcement leaders, commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets, illegally and for no reason. This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk. That's when the downward spiral began. He doubled down on his dangerous National Guard deployment by fanning the flames even harder. And the president, he did it on purpose.
Let's go live now to Los Angeles, where our correspondent Carl Nassman is following this story for us. Carl, the curfew went into effect a few minutes ago. Tell us what the situation is like where you are.
Yeah, that's an 8 p.m. curfew, so we're about a couple minutes into it now. We are in that zone where there are severe restrictions in place. If you're out on the streets, you would be subject to arrest for most people in this area. And you can take a look behind me. There is a very big line of police officers here. This is California Highway Patrol. You can see those batons at the ready. And what we've been told is that they're now ready to, any moment now, begin to march forward and clear the streets here of anybody who's still left on the streets in this area of downtown Los Angeles. Something that the mayor was stressing was that this is a small area. This is about a 1 square mile zone of downtown Los Angeles, of course, which is already a small area of the city. So emphasizing, this isn't martial law. This isn't something where no one will be out on the streets in the entire city. But as you can see, taking this very seriously here, a large police presence. And most of those demonstrators that we've seen, even in pockets, even in small gatherings throughout the day, have now dissipated. There's very few people left in the streets. It's just media right now. We do have an exception to be out here. I'm just going to look down that way and very empty streets there as well. So we're going to be waiting here, Steve, and we want to just see how this curfew does go into effect, what kind of reaction it gets from anyone that is left out in the streets. But this is something that was announced by the mayor of Los Angeles earlier on today, and this is clearly an attempt to try to gain control of the situation, especially as you can tell, we're only a few minutes away from sunset, and that's when we've seen some of those troublemakers really come out and start to wreak a bit of havoc across the city.
Yeah, Carl, you've been out on the streets for us for the last few days. Just remind us of how events have unfolded and indeed escalated over the last few days that have now culminated and led to this application of a curfew.
Well, it's interesting because earlier we saw a mirror image of something that we saw on Sunday night, and that was a group of protesters making their way down onto the freeway, which passes right through downtown Los Angeles, the 101 freeway. They briefly again blocked traffic on both directions until police were able to get down there, usher them away. Luckily, nobody was hurt. That could be a dangerous situation. But, we saw these very chaotic scenes on Sunday where protesters managed to occupy parts of the freeway for about an hour. It took a lot of effort from police to get them out of there. Several arrests were made then. 67 people arrested just in that incident today. And these are the kinds of scenes, obviously, that they want to avoid here and try to get visual control over the city. They don't want any more scenes playing out. And I think there's a bit of a messaging battle here, too. We saw two different addresses by two leaders of California, the mayor of Los Angeles and then the governor of California, denouncing the actions by President Trump. And then we've heard President Trump saying that he wants to see law and order in the city, and he believes that his actions of deputizing and sending in National Guard troops, as well as beginning to send in hundreds of active duty Marines, he thinks that those actions helped to start to calm things down. But it definitely seems like right now this is the biggest action we've seen from the local officials here to really gain the upper hand. And again, we're waiting and watching as this line of California Highway Patrol officers stands by, and we'll see if they begin to move in. And there's likely similar scenes playing out at different areas, different boundaries of where this curfew is set. Again, a 1 mile radius in downtown Los Angeles. Actually, Steve, just before I let you go, I could tell you, can you see that right there? We're getting a cell phone alert, and this is telling everybody in the area. It's a public safety alert saying that the city of Los Angeles has declared a curfew. It's now officially in place from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. So everybody in this area right now getting that text message for people to know that it's now a curfew zone.
Carl, thanks very much for getting us up to speed with those latest details now that the curfew has been put into place. Carl Nassman there on the streets of Los Angeles. U.S. President Donald Trump says the protests in downtown L.A. against immigration raids are an assault on peace and public order. During a visit to North Carolina, the president doubled down on deploying more National Guard troops and Marines to the city.
As long as we have the military there, the protests won't mean anything. Last night, if we weren't there, they would have burned down the city. But they did not a lot of damage other than they broke up a lot of concrete looking for weapons. You know, those are weapons. If that hits somebody in the head, the person's dead. You know that, right?
Yes, what do you mean by a very heavy force will be met with the protest?
Oh, the military will be very heavy force. I'm very proud to tell you that. They might as well turn around. They're wasting their time. Some of them will end up in jail for a long period of time.
Now joining us for more on this from LA to discuss the legal implications of deploying the U.S. military to the streets of the city is Jody David Armour, a professor of law at University of Southern California. Jody, thanks very much for your time today. Now, we heard earlier from Governor Gavin Newsom criticizing President Trump. He called his actions a brazen abuse of power. Is he right, or is there a legal reasoning for the Trump administration to deploy a military to the streets of L.A.?
Well, frankly, there is quite a bit of precedent that gives a president the power to invoke, for example, the Insurrection Act. It was done, for example, in 1957. The local authorities, governor, and others did not want to integrate schools, did not want Black children coming into the schools. Dwight Eisenhower federalized the National Guard, told them to stand down and stop interfering with Black kids making it to the schools, and then he sent troops in to walk those Black girls and boys into those schools and sit them in the seats. And that happened also in the South and places like Alabama and Mississippi in the early 60s. So there is precedent for what he's doing. And, you know, his position would be, I have a national mandate. And here are some local authorities who are refusing to robustly enforce my national mandate. And so just like back there in 1957, when Eisenhower had to federalize the National Guard to make sure that the local authorities conform to his wishes and will, the national mandate, I'm just doing the same kind of thing. So he's going to try to spin the narrative for sure that way.
But the circumstances are incredibly different in this aspect, aren't they?
Well, yeah. Yeah, you know, there you had somebody trying to promote and protect values of equality, right, and saying that there was a national consensus that black citizens should be treated equally with white citizens, and we will send in federal troops to enforce that. There's not that clear consensus on the values that Trump is trying to promote or vindicate by bringing in the agents rather than allowing the process of protest, the normal process of protest and, free speech to run its course as it has been in many other instances without the federal officers coming in.
Well, a curfew has now been put into place. In your view, is that the right course of action for local authorities to take?
Well, a lot of local authorities are going to err on the side of safety, and too often civil liberties are sacrificed for the sake of safety. And so I'm sure that local authorities are going that route, but they have to recognize a lot of ordinary citizens think just as important as safety are their rights to have freedom of movement and not feel like they're in a paramilitary kind of situation.
Thank you very much, Jody. We're going to have to leave it there, but thanks for your insight today. Jody David Armour, Professor of Law at the University of Southern California. Now, police have used water cannon after bricks and fireworks were thrown at them during a second evening of disorder in the North Irish town of Ballymena in County Antrim. It's in the UK. And last night, 15 officers were injured in similar violence. The trouble broke out following a protest about an alleged sexual assault. Detectives say they are investigating a number of attacks on the homes and businesses of foreign nationals as racially motivated hate crimes. Vincent McAvenny has more.
A second night of disorder. Petrol bombs, fireworks and masonry thrown at police. In response, baton rounds fired, riot dogs on the scene and water cannon deployed. The scenes on Monday and Tuesday night followed a court hearing. Two teenage boys who spoke through a Romanian interpreter charged with the attempted rape of a teenage girl. Their solicitors said they would be denying the charges. Police say they believe some people were intent on violence.
This violence was clearly racially motivated and targeted at our minority ethnic community and the police. It was racist thuggery, pure and simply, and any attempt to justify or explain it as something else is misplaced. I want to condemn these attacks in the strongest possible terms. It has no place in our society and should be loudly condemned by all right-thinking people.
Police have called for calm and say a significant presence will remain in Ballymena in the coming days. Vincent McAvenny, BBC News.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Two far-right Israeli government ministers have been sanctioned by the UK, Norway, Australia, Canada and New Zealand because of what the British government describes as repeated incitements of violence against Palestinian communities. Israel's Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich will both face a travel ban from the UK and see their UK assets frozen. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale has the story.
Two ministers on whom Israel's coalition government depends, both hardliners, both on the nationalist far right, both now officially sanctioned by Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand and Norway. They accuse the two men of repeatedly inciting acts of aggression and violence against civilians in the occupied West Bank, encouraging the growth of illegal settlements, abusing the human rights of Palestinians. And for that, they're now subject to travel and asset bans.
Today we are announcing sanctions against those individuals because we have been absolutely clear this has to stop, and we stand for a two-state solution, and the settler violence that we've seen in the West Bank particularly is entirely unacceptable and must stop.
Mr. Speaker, 2024 saw the worst settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank.
In part, the government's responding to political pressure. Echoed in Parliament this evening, MPs urging ministers to go further and formally recognise a state of Palestine. In Israel, there was fury.
It is outrageous that elected representatives and members of the government are subjected to this kind of measures. We will hold a special government meeting early next week to decide on our response to this unacceptable decision.
Today in Gaza, there were yet more funerals after yet more airstrikes near Khan Yunis. There were also reports of more Palestinians shot dead near a US-backed aid distribution centre. For its part, the US stood by Israel, saying the sanctions were extremely unhelpful.
It's a huge shock, and I have a feeling the United States will respond appropriately. And I'm hoping that it will be a strong condemnation of this action on the part of these nations that really we would like to think are our allies.
Those allies hope their sanctions may change Israel's behaviour in the West Bank, where today in Nablus there was another army raid. But without US support, they may be waiting some time. James Landell, BBC News.
Hundreds of people have gathered for a vigil in Austria after a gunman killed 10 people in a shooting at a high school in what's the deadliest gun attack in the country's recent history. The vigil marks the start of 3 days of national mourning in Austria. It's thought the suspect was a 21-year-old former pupil at the school who used 2 weapons, both of which were legally owned. Now, the attack happened in Graz, Austria's second largest city. It's located about 200 kilometers from the capital of Vienna. Northern India is in the grip of an intense heat wave, with the temperatures soaring past 45 degrees Celsius. It's having an impact on normal life and sparking health concerns. The BBC's Arunadhay Mukherjee is on the ground in Delhi, and he joins us now for more on this. Arunadhay, living in the city, take us through just how bad it really is.
Well, it's been very intense over the last few days, Stephen. It's gotten progressively worse, and we're expecting these conditions to continue at least for the next 2 to 3 more days before we're being told there are some predictions of light rainfall in some parts of northern India. So people really waiting for that, hoping that along with the weekend, we will see some showers in some parts of northern India. As you mentioned, in some cities, the temperature crossed over 45 degrees. In one of the cities in northern Indian state of Rajasthan on the western side, one city recorded a temperature of over 47 degrees Celsius. So these are very, very harsh conditions. Just to describe, when we're standing outside, it's hard to stay outside for a long period of time. It's still early hours, so we don't have the sun in full force, but in the next couple of hours it's going to get even more intense. And we're standing in a very central part of Delhi. This is a shopping center along with a business district. You're seeing a lot of traffic at the moment, but this place will see a fair number of people because there are a lot of shops that you can see behind me which are of course yet to open. But the worry really is, how worse can it get? Because every year it's been getting worse and worse. When you step outside, you're drenched in sweat in a few minutes of time. When you're trying to breathe in, it feels like you're breathing in hot steam. When you're stepping out of the air conditioning is when you really feel the big difference in temperature. You feel these waves of hot air sort of just slapping across your body. It's very hard, especially for those on two-wheelers who who are traveling long distances as they pierce through this kind of hot climate. So it's been getting progressively worse, and that's the big worry, because there are health concerns, as we've been pointing out. Last year, in just 1 month of heat wave, there were reports of about 100 casualties just because of heat-related deaths. We also, we saw reports of over 40 to 45,000 people who were admitted at hospitals because of heat-related illnesses. So this is a very real problem, which seems to be getting worse year by year because of climate change, excessive construction as well, and the reduction of green cover, especially in these metro cities.
All right, Arunday, thanks for getting us across those details. Do stay cool, as cool as you can over there. Arunday Mukherjee in Delhi. Now it's time to turn our focus to business and market news in Business Today. Top officials from the United States and China say they've agreed to a framework to move forward on trade after 2 days of intense high-level negotiations in London. While details were limited, this does mark a step forward in resolving the ongoing tension between the world's top two economies. Investors here in Asia welcoming the news, trading mostly higher today. Well, let's get more details from these talks with our Asia business correspondent, Suranjana Tiwari. She joins us from our Singapore newsroom. Suranjana, is there any more details you can tell us about this framework?
Well, Steve, the key word is framework. This is not a deal. Both the US and China have said what will happen now is that both of them will take the framework back to their respective presidents, and only if they approve will it be implemented. Now, there's likely to be a real sense of relief. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick told reporters that the framework deal puts, quote, meat on the bones of an agreement reached last month in Geneva to ease those retaliatory tariffs, and they had reached crushing triple-digit levels, of course. The issue with the Geneva deal has been China's continued curbs on critical mineral exports. Those minerals are used in all sorts of cars, planes, defense equipment. Now, Lutnick has said an agreement on rare earths would be fundamental to any agreement reached in London, but there are still very deep differences between the two sides.
Yeah, so more broadly then, Suranjana, help us understand what this means for the US-China trade war.
Yeah, well, the problem there is that the US view of how China runs its economy is that it's export-led, that it leads to a lot of dumping of goods in other countries. Now, the details of any deal, though, will really matter. Both sides have bargaining chips. The US needs those rare earths, but China also needs the chip software and chemicals that the US has put export controls on. But there's also the economic slowdown in China, so Beijing just needs the economy to run efficiently and to achieve growth. And in the US, Trump has political pressures over these tariffs. And of course, Taiwan is still a very big thorn between the two countries. So as far as the chaos that tariffs and this trade war has caused so far, this is a pretty minor development, and the road ahead is likely to continue being bumpy for a while longer.
Yeah, well, thanks for getting us across those developments, Sue. Our Asia business correspondent, Suranjana Tiwari, in our Singapore newsroom. Now, staying with trade, a U.S. federal appeals court is allowing President Trump's global tariffs to remain in effect while it considers their validity. It follows the Trump administration's challenge to a ruling last month by the U.S. Court of International Trade that prevented many of the president's sweeping tariff increases from being applied. The appeals court in Washington has set the end of July to hear arguments. Now, those ongoing trade tensions have prompted the World Bank to downgrade global growth for the year. They've also issued a warning that the global economy will see its slowest decade of growth since the 1960s. The BBC's North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury, has more from New York.
In its latest economic outlook, the World Bank has revised down its forecast for global growth this year. It now expects the world economy to expand by just 2.3%, a notable downgrade from the 2.7% growth that it was projecting back in January. If these latest figures do prove accurate, it would mark the slowest pace of global growth over a 7-year period since the 1960s. The US isn't immune to this slowdown. Growth in the world's largest economy is now expected to come in at just 1.4% this year, almost a full percentage point lower than earlier estimates. A significant adjustment. But China, America's biggest economic rival, is expected to weather the storm more effectively. According to the World Bank, Beijing has the financial resilience to weather ongoing trade tensions and political uncertainty. Despite all this, the World Bank stopped short of predicting an outright global recession, saying the chance of that happening remains below 10%. But the bank joins other major institutions, including the IMF and the OECD, in warning that Trump's trade policies pose a serious threat to global growth.
Singapore-based budget airline Jetstar Asia will close down at the end of July. The low-cost carrier has struggled with rising supplier costs, high airport fees and increased competition from other airlines in the region. Its Australian owner, Qantas, says the closure will provide it with over $300 million to invest towards renewing its fleet of aircraft. The closure of Jetstar Asia will not impact its Australia-based Jetstar Airways operations, nor those of Jetstar Japan, according to a statement from Qantas. Uber will trial robo-taxis, which are autonomous driverless cars, in London next spring. The ride-hailing app will work with the UK artificial intelligence firm Wave, which has been testing out the technology on the city's streets. It is not yet clear whether the vehicles in Uber's trial will be available for customers to use, but Uber intends to add them as a regular option via its UK app as soon as legislation allows. Now, before we go, let's take you back to Los Angeles, where a curfew has come into effect in downtown LA as protests over immigration raids continue for a fifth day. In the last hour, California Governor Gavin Newsom has said he doesn't want the streets of his state militarized by the country's armed forces. We'll have more on this developing story as in the hours ahead. Thanks for joining me here on Newsday. Bye for now.
What is going on?
People love how the new Homes.com helps them get quick answers about any property by connecting them to the actual listing agent.
Oh, so I'm done?
Oh, no. We're still not sure everyone knows that we're the only site that always connects you to the listing agent rather than selling off your contact info. So we're gonna keep you up there a little while longer.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting great exposure.
Speaking of exposure, can we get him a hat?
Ooh, what about a beret?
Oh. Ding dong.
Homes.com, we've done your homework.
At Avocado Green. BBC News, fresh off the success of the Oscar-nominated Wicked, Cynthia Erivo talks about getting back in the studio for her new album, growing up feeling different, and how she finally feels able to open up. The interview.
Got a good clap.
Cynthia Erivo made her name on stage. Her debut Broadway performance in The Colour Purple was called Soul Shaking, winning her a Best Actress Tony Award. After that came big screen roles in films like Widows and Harriet.
I'm standing here. You can talk to me.
I don't know you.
You don't have to.
But her career went stratospheric as Elphaba in the hit film adaptation of Wicked.
Some of us are just different.
I could never have imagined.
She's releasing her deeply personal new album, I Forgive You. I sat down with her to reflect on her life and success.
I think if it had happened 5-10 years ago, I may not have been ready for it.
On how she keeps going.
I have a flask with me everywhere I go. I drink tea all day, every day.
The final touches for Wicked 2.
Done, but I have a couple reshoots to go to.
And how she relishes what she calls her gift.
Gave you my all, but you took the worst of me. You took the worst.
Of all people, asking me style advice. Sleeves up
Sleeves
or
up
sleeves
or sleeves down? Yeah, yeah.
I mean, look, what are you doing? Why are you asking me?
Because I think you're stylish. I think you'd get it.
Come on.
Yeah.
Really?
I'm seeing the socks, the attention to detail. They're blue, matching the blue. I see it.
Well, I'm feeling, high as a kite because I've got a style praise from someone who's held up as a kind of a style icon. So I'm going with that one.
Thank you.
I'm in a happy place already.
Yeah.
We're in a studio. We're in a recording studio.
We are, yeah.
So does that naturally make you kind of? It's
relax.
Like, here I am.
Yeah,
this is
it
my
feels a little bit like
zone.
home. I've been like staring at this board here, and I'm like, oh, this is nice.
Do you know what the buttons do? Do you know do you know anything about any of this stuff?
A little bit, not very much, because my place is. I'm viciously unkind, but I can still read what you're thinking.
You've just made me very happy because one of the things I was hoping for somehow.
Yeah.
I was going to get Cynthia to sing,
sing.
And albeit that was a lovely, quiet, modest moment, but that's a nod to that wonderful Annie Lennox song. And it's just a little moment, isn't it, at the beginning of the...
Yeah, it opens the album, yeah.
Why that?
Because I, fell in love with that song a very long time ago, and I've been singing it in some of the concerts that I get to do. I love Annie Lennox. And I just loved the honesty in that song and what it says. That it says that we are fallible, but it doesn't mean that we are blind to what's going on. I just thought it was the perfect thing to open up that part of the album, yeah.
It is one of those songs, and there's a lot of wonderful songs of your own that follow, obviously, but that song can bring people to tears.
Yeah, definitely.
And yours will too.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure if that's a thank you. I suppose it is.
I think tears are catharsis, It's good for people. I think I once said that tears are cleansing. So if it brings people to tears, that's good. Yeah. It takes a lot for me to cry, but I have cried a lot, that's for sure.
Oh, that sounds like you've got kind of walls.
Oh, I've definitely had walls.
They coming down?
Yeah, I think they're I'm going to call them electric walls. They elevate and then they descend. Yeah, depending on where I am and how safe I feel with people. And it takes time with people for the walls to come down, but they do.
And I just want to point out that already that you've got your flask with
yeah.
you, which I think is a really nice touch, by the way. Can we inquire what's in the flask? What is the flask thing?
Well, I have a flask with me everywhere I go. I drink tea all day, every day. Herbal tea.
It's a quality flask.
It's a good flask. It's a good flask. But I have several different colours of this same flask, and I just keep repeating them and using as many, having as much tea as I can.
I don't know if it's an age thing, but I can talk about flasks all day.
Oh, me too. But
I'm like a really.
For
I can.
tea, this is the best flask.
Yeah. Have you tried out a few? You know your stuff.
I have tried out a few, and some stay warm for not long enough.
Yeah.
Some are, this doesn't drip. What would be hilarious if I took this upside down and it poured, but...
You took a risk.
I did. I took a risk and I won.
I like that.
Yes, it doesn't drip at all, so I can carry this around with me everywhere.
Well, I'm going to take your line there of
Yeah.
taking risks, and I'm going to make that bigger.
Do it. Do it.
Is that you?
Yeah.
You're a risk taker.
Very much so. I think so. But I'm not sure if I'm doing it on purpose. I think I'm doing it because there's a thrill in not necessarily following a straight line. Do you know what I mean? Trying things that are different, challenging myself. So I think that's probably where the risk taking comes from, where it seems like I'm taking a risk. To me, it feels really natural. To me, it just feels like I'm following my intuition, but often my intuition leads me to things that force me to learn and grow. Yeah.
See, confession time, I'm quite the reverse. So putting yourself out there,
Yeah.
like you do,
Yeah.
on your new album,
That's right.
with your music and the lyrics, which I've listened to closely, there's a lot
Yes.
of stuff
Yes.
in there.
Yeah.